Wilson, Mary Catherine Ham, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you. The Morning Majority, 630.
WMAL.
7:07 on WMAL. Stuart Varney coming up a half hour from now. Ben Bernanke didn't sound so positive yesterday on the economy.
And as soon as he spoke, the Dow went right in the toilet.
And the CBO put out what Mary Catherine Ham calls the holy crap
report. Yes.
The holy crap report.
The expletives just go up as we move on.
That's right. So we'll talk to Stuart Varney at 7:36. Landy Davis, former Clinton White House counsel, on the show about 8:06. And, of course, the president gave his big speech on Afghanistan last night.
Starting next month, we will be able to remove 10,000 of our troops from Afghanistan by the end of this year.
And then all 33,000 surge troops out by September of next year. John Bolton joins us now, former UN Ambassador. So we've been asking all morning, and I think I know your answer to this, but I'll put it out there for you anyway. Was this a political decision or a military decision?
Well, it was entirely political. You can see from what the president's done, and really what goes back 18 months ago when he gave his West Point speech in December of 2009 announcing the surge, and said at that time, 18 months later, we'd begin to withdraw, a date which has absolutely no connection with conditions on the ground in Afghanistan. He's determined to begin the process now. He was even 18 months ago, to help avoid a primary challenge from the left within the Democratic Party, and the timing of his of the final withdrawal of the surge troops takes him right into the election season next year. So it protects him from a debacle on the battlefield in the meantime, but allows him to campaign in September of October 2012 as having gone a long way to end the war. And it even gets worse than that. The more I read this speech, the worse it gets. He has basically now committed to a full withdrawal over a time period, again, without regard to whether the Taliban and al-Qaeda are making a comeback, conditions are better or worse there from the perspective of stopping international terrorism. It is a speech that signals American withdrawal in the larger sense, I think, from the world as a whole.
Ambassador Bolton, I couldn't agree with you more, and that's why I think many military leaders are quietly saying, not in an overt way, but behind the scenes, really we ought to be focused on what works rather than what's politically convenient. But it's also interesting that the president seems to have found the only pathway in Afghanistan that irritates everybody. It irritates the people at the Pentagon. It irritates Nancy Pelosi because she says it's not enough. It irritates the Republicans because he says this is not the modest withdrawal that I and others had hoped for. The man can't find a policy that pleases anyone.
Well, look, he's not a leader. Fundamentally, he's not a leader. He doesn't understand what it means to be commander-in-chief. This is just another example of it. But it's going to have very negative consequences. Number one, he's just given Taliban and al-Qaeda a roadmap. So they're going to be sitting in their sanctuaries across the border in Pakistan, planning their vacation schedules to take advantage of our troop withdrawals. Number two, although he did mention the sanctuaries, his discussion of Pakistan was very cursory, and that really is, to my mind, at least as much of a threat to the United States as Taliban and al-Qaeda retaking Afghanistan, because if Pakistan destabilizes and falls to radical Islamicists, we risk having that country's very substantial nuclear arsenal in the hands of fanatics and terrorists, and that's really a concern.
And let me ask you one more question, and that is, if we announce we're leaving, and we still have some nearly 70,000 troops in the country after this surge group is brought out just before the elections, doesn't that put the people who are left behind at greater risk?
Well, it does, and what it means is the pace of operations is reduced. When the White House was floating this speech over the past day or two, they talked about the surge troops coming out at the end of 2012. And the military authorities would tell you that the fighting season in Afghanistan is roughly April through October. So a December 2012 withdrawal means you can fight right up to the end of the fighting season when the winter weather and snow and whatnot begin, and then withdraw in November and December. If you're talking about withdrawal in August and September of next year, you're really talking about July, getting ready for it. You're talking about commanders hunkering down, not willing to risk casualties with their troops. So you've cut the fighting season in half at least, and maybe more. And I just think we made a big mistake in Afghanistan after the Soviet Union withdrew in the late 80s. We turned away from it. We allowed Taliban to take control. I just have this very, very uneasy feeling that we're pulling back from Afghanistan again, and we could risk seeing exactly the same thing happen.
And how long do you think we have to stay in Afghanistan?
Well, I think we need to be reconciled to being there for a very long time. Obviously, we want the Afghans to do more to protect themselves, but to do that, to get loyalty to our way of looking at things, the Afghan tribes, particularly along the border with Pakistan, need to believe we're there for as long as it takes and we're going to win. If they thought we were inevitably the winning side, you'd be amazed at how loyal they would be. If they think we're about to turn and cut and run, they're just going to wait for the Taliban.
We've been there for 10 years now. And we're not winning, I guess, is what you're saying. Is that?
Well, remember, we've been in Western Europe since 1945. Through 1990 to fight the Cold War and now for other purposes. Being deployed overseas, being in difficult circumstances, is part of what it takes to defend our global interest. We are a global power. We are at risk from terrorists, and people who say, well, gee, this has taken a long time. Well, how long did you want to fight the Cold War? 10, 15 years too long for you?
But my question is that the American people, I think, are getting tired of it, and if it's a political decision by the president, which I agree with you that it is a political decision, it's a political decision for him to get reelected, which means the American people don't want to be there. And I guess my concern is that you can't win wars without the support of the American people.
Well, that's exactly right. But part of the reason that support for the war in Afghanistan has fallen has been the president's utter absence from defending it for the past 2.5 years.
He hasn't made the case.
He has not made the case. And I have to say, at the end of the Bush administration, he wasn't making the case either, or he was making the case that we were going to make Afghanistan into a corruption-free democratic society. I mean, I have nothing against that objective for the Afghan people, but we're not there for them.
Well, who can
there for us?
That's right.
Has anybody been able to make the case for Afghanistan? Because it is a confusing war about the Taliban, Al Qaeda. How can you even measure what is success there?
Well, I think you can make the case because it's the difference between a safe America and an unsafe America. By overthrowing Taliban after 9/11 and by keeping up this pressure over the past 10 years, we've done a lot to prevent another 9/11. But that just because it takes a long time doesn't mean that we can turn our attention away. Having a short attention span, fighting against a group of religious fanatics who have a very long attention span, is a prescription for trouble down the road.
We asked Katie McFarland this question, and she said essentially that there has to be a political solution as well, that militarily is not the only answer. And my concern is that can you ever trust an Afghanistan government, a central government, especially with Hamid Karzai as the leader?
Well, I certainly don't trust the Taliban, and I think what is as troubling as anything else here is the administration appears determined to try to negotiate with Taliban to get that political settlement, to get American forces out even more quickly. I think you only negotiate with the Taliban when they're on their backs, and that's the kind of negotiation I'd like to have with them.
Well, what about Karzai?
Well, I think, he's in his second term now, and I think a leader of his country ought to develop the old George Washington tradition and say 2 terms is enough. Mm-hmm. And as a number of observers have suggested, I think we need to find somebody else. The government of India warned us about Karzai right after 9/11, and I think we've seen the consequences. He served his purpose, and we need other Afghan leaders.
Mr. Ambassador, it's always great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for your time and your insights.
Well, thanks again for
any announcement coming from you anytime soon?
I'm still thinking about it. I watch things like this and the president's posture, and I've got to believe the American people see his indecision on Afghanistan and his inability to foster policies that help the economy recover. This man is very vulnerable next year.
Absolutely. All right, Mr. Ambassador, good to